The missing person report filed on March 20th, 1997, was as straightforward as they come. Thomas Tommy Morrison, age 34, driving a blue Peterbilt with Colorado plates, hauling electronics to Phoenix, last seen at a truck stop in Denver. For 26 years, this case gathered dust in filing cabinets while Tommy's family desperately searched for answers. Then Maria Santos decided to expand her gas station's parking lot, and what her construction crew found buried 6 feet underground would rewrite everything investigators thought they knew about Tommy Morrison's disappearance. But before we get to that shocking discovery that would turn this cold case upside down, we need to understand who Tommy Morrison was and why his disappearance made absolutely no sense to anyone who knew him. Tommy Morrison wasn't just any truck driver. For over a decade, he'd been the absolute gold standard of the trucking industry. Perfect safety record spanning 12 years. Never missed a delivery deadline. Never had a single traffic violation. He knew every mile of highway between Colorado and California like the back of his weathered hand. His wife Sarah used to joke that Tommy could navigate to Phoenix with his eyes closed, but it wasn't just his driving skills that made Tommy special. It was his unwavering reliability. Tommy was obsessively routine. Same pre-trip inspection checklist every morning, performed with military precision. Same coffee order at the same truck stops. Same route preferences. And most importantly, every single night at exactly 9 p.m., no matter where he was on the road, Tommy would call Sarah. Rain or shine, mountain passes or desert highways, through blizzards and scorching heat, that call never failed to come. It was their sacred ritual, their daily proof that their love could bridge any distance. Until March 15th, 1997. That morning started like any other. At 5:47 a.m., Tommy signed out of the Denver freight terminal with his characteristic neat handwriting. Security cameras captured him performing his methodical pre-trip inspection of his blue Peterbilt, checking every tire, every light, every cargo strap with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. His manifest was straightforward. 43 boxes of high-end electronics bound for Phoenix. Total cargo value, $127,000. For Tommy, who regularly transported valuable shipments, this was just another Tuesday. At 6:15 a.m., he pulled out of the terminal parking lot, giving his usual two-finger wave to security guard Mike Patterson. Everything was normal. Everything was routine. Everything was exactly as it had been 1,000 times before. But what happened next would defy every logical explanation and launch one of the most baffling disappearances in American trucking history. Here's what made Tommy's disappearance absolutely impossible to explain. His truck was equipped with cutting-edge satellite tracking technology that was considered space-age in 1997. This wasn't some basic GPS system. This was military-grade tracking that transmitted his exact location every 30 minutes to Mountain West Freight's dispatch center. As Tommy drove south on Interstate 25 toward his destination, those signals came in like clockwork. 7:15 a.m. right on schedule. 7:45 a.m. maintaining perfect speed. 8:15 a.m. exactly where he should be. The tracking showed Tommy making excellent time, following his planned route with typical precision. The system worked flawlessly for hours. Then at 11:47 a.m., the final transmission placed Tommy's truck near the small Colorado town of Walsenburg, about 150 miles south of Denver. At 11:47 and 30 seconds, something happened that the technology manufacturers insisted was impossible. The signal didn't just weaken or fade out gradually, it went completely dead. Not like equipment failure or signal interference, but as if the entire sophisticated tracking system had been instantly and completely destroyed. But that wasn't even the strangest part of what happened that day. What came next would turn this missing person case into something far more sinister. When 9 p.m. came and went without Tommy's nightly call to Sarah, every alarm bell in her head started ringing. Tommy had never, and I mean never, missed that call. Not once in 12 years of marriage. Not during blizzards, not during mechanical breakdowns, not even when he'd been hospitalized with food poisoning in 1994. Sarah immediately contacted Mountain West Freight. Night dispatcher Janet Powell had already noticed the missing satellite signal and had been trying to reach Tommy for hours. CB radio calls went unanswered. His cell phone went straight to voicemail, unusual, because Tommy always kept it charged and within reach. The search operation began at first light. Colorado State Police helicopters scoured every mile of highway between Denver and Walsenburg. Search and rescue teams with trained dogs combed the mountainous terrain along Tommy's route. They checked every rest stop, every truck stop, every service station. They found absolutely nothing. No truck, no skid marks, no signs of an accident or mechanical failure. No evidence that Tommy Morrison had ever driven through that stretch of highway. It was as if Tommy Morrison and his 40-foot tractor trailer had simply evaporated into thin air. But the mystery was just beginning. 3 days after Tommy vanished, something deeply unsettling happened at the Mountain West Freight Terminal. A mysterious man appeared in the parking lot, walking around the exact spot where Tommy's truck had been stationed just days before. Security footage shows him methodically examining the area. He was in his 50s, wearing mechanic's coveralls with no company logo. When approached by security, he claimed he was investigating mechanical issues that might explain Tommy's disappearance. But here's the problem. He had no identification, no work order, and no authorization to be there. When security tried to question him further, he simply walked away and vanished just as mysteriously as he'd appeared. This incident was filed away as a minor curiosity by investigators. That decision would prove to be a catastrophic mistake that would cost precious years in solving the case. To understand why Tommy's disappearance made absolutely no sense, you need to understand who Tommy Morrison really was. Sarah Morrison was 28 when her husband vanished. They'd been inseparable since high school, married for 6 wonderful years, and Tommy was literally her entire world. Tommy wasn't the type to just disappear, Sarah told lead investigator Detective Ray Kowalski during her initial interview. He was obsessed with communication and responsibility. If he was going to be 10 minutes late, he'd call. If there was unexpected traffic, he'd call. If he saw a beautiful sunset, he'd call to describe it to me in detail. Sarah absolutely refused to accept the theories that some investigators quietly suggested that Tommy had decided to abandon his life and start fresh somewhere else. She knew her husband's character. She knew his heart. She knew his unwavering commitment to their marriage and his work. For months after the disappearance, Sarah maintained hope with desperate determination. She kept Tommy's dinner warm every night until midnight, just in case he walked through the door. She left the front porch light on. She refused to change their joint bank account or file for death benefits. Sarah made hundreds of phone calls to truck stops, roadside diners, and mechanic shops along Tommy's usual routes. She hired a private investigator with money she couldn't afford to spend. She organized volunteer search parties that covered thousands of square miles of Colorado terrain. She personally distributed over 5,000 missing person flyers across 4 states. But as months turned into years, hope began to fade into something much darker. The not knowing was torture. The endless questions without answers were slowly destroying her sanity. 2 years after Tommy's disappearance, Sarah received a phone call that would haunt her for the next 2 decades. A man who absolutely refused to give his name claimed he'd seen Tommy's distinctive blue Peterbilt at a truck stop in Nevada during the summer of 1998. The driver definitely wasn't Tommy, the caller said, his voice shaking with obvious nervousness. But it was absolutely his truck. Same cab design, same Colorado plates, same Mountain West Freight logo on the doors. When I started asking the driver questions about where he'd gotten the rig, he got real nervous and took off fast. Sarah immediately contacted authorities, but when investigators tried to trace the mysterious call, they discovered it had been made from a payphone in Las Vegas. The truck stop mentioned by the caller had no record of the vehicle, and without more specific information, the lead went nowhere. But this wouldn't be the last time someone claimed to have seen Tommy's truck. Between 1999 and 2005, police received 17 separate reports of Tommy Morrison's blue Peterbilt being spotted across the American Southwest. Arizona, Nevada, New Mexico, even as far south as the Mexican border. Each sighting was thoroughly investigated by determined detectives. None led to any concrete evidence. The reports shared eerie similarities that sent chills down investigators' spines. In every single case, the witness claimed the driver wasn't Tommy Morrison. Some described an older man with gray hair and a beard. Others mentioned a younger man with distinctive tattoos covering his arms. One particularly unsettling witness swore they'd seen two men in the cab, apparently arguing about something urgent. Detective Kowalski began developing a theory that Tommy's truck was being used for illegal cross-border smuggling operations. The sophisticated tracking system had been disabled, making the truck invisible to law enforcement radar. But if Tommy's truck was still on the road after all these years, where was Tommy himself? That question would remain unanswered for decades. The Tommy Morrison case officially went cold in 2003 when the Colorado State Police ran out of leads to pursue. Detective Kowalski retired in 2008, taking with him decades of institutional knowledge about the Morrison disappearance. The case files were moved to the basement storage facility of Colorado State Police headquarters, where they joined thousands of other unsolved mysteries. Sarah Morrison eventually made the heartbreaking decision to move to Oregon in 2006, unable to bear living in the same house where she'd waited so many years for Tommy to come home. She found love again and remarried in 2009 to a compassionate man named David, who understood her tragic past and never asked her to forget it. By 2020, Tommy Morrison's disappearance was largely forgotten by law enforcement and the media. Only Sarah and a small group of amateur online investigators occasionally discussed the case on true crime forums and social media groups. 23 years had passed since that fateful March morning. The trail was ice cold. Physical evidence had been lost or deteriorated. Key witnesses had died or moved away. Justice seemed not just unlikely, but completely impossible. But fate wasn't finished with Tommy Morrison's story. Sometimes the universe has a way of bringing buried truths back to the surface, even after decades of silence. Maria Santos had owned the Crossroads gas station on the outskirts of Walsenburg for 8 successful years. Business was steady and profitable, but Maria had bigger dreams for her property. She wanted to expand significantly. More gas pumps, a larger convenience store, and definitely more parking spaces for the massive RVs that regularly stopped for fuel. The expansion project required clearing a half-acre lot directly behind her station. The land was occupied by a massive abandoned warehouse that had been sitting empty since the early 1990s. Maria had purchased the property at an excellent price, planning to demolish the deteriorating warehouse and transform the space into prime commercial real estate. Monday morning, March 12th, the demolition crew arrived right on schedule. Foreman Jake Martinez and his experienced team began the process of clearing vegetation and debris from around the warehouse. It was routine construction work, until Jake's excavator hit something that definitely wasn't supposed to be there. At first I thought we'd struck an old septic tank, or maybe a forgotten foundation, Jake later told investigators. But when we cleared away more dirt and debris, I could see paint underneath. Bright blue paint, and chrome bumpers that were definitely from a vehicle. That's when Jake Martinez realized they weren't just demolishing an old warehouse. They were potentially uncovering evidence of a crime that had been hidden for decades. What Jake had discovered would crack open one of the most devastating betrayals in Colorado criminal history and finally bring justice to Tommy Morrison's family. What Jake Martinez had found buried beneath years of accumulated dirt and vegetation was the cab of a commercial truck. Not just any truck, a blue Peterbilt with Colorado license plates reading MW4471, the exact same plates that had been registered to Tommy Morrison's truck in 1997. Maria Santos called 911 immediately, her voice shaking with the realization that her simple business expansion had uncovered something far more significant than old concrete and rusty pipes. Within 2 hours, her construction site had been transformed into a major crime scene. Colorado State Police arrived first, followed by FBI agents and specialized crime scene technicians. What had started as a routine demolition project had suddenly become the biggest break in a 26-year-old cold case that had stumped investigators for decades. But the truck's discovery raised more questions than it answered. If Tommy's truck had been buried here since 1997, just miles from where his satellite tracker had gone mysteriously silent, why hadn't anyone found it before? The warehouse had been abandoned, but surely someone would have noticed the ground disturbance required to bury a massive tractor trailer. And the question that haunted everyone involved, if they'd found Tommy's truck, where was Tommy Morrison himself? The excavation process took 3 full days. Crime scene technicians worked with archaeological precision, carefully documenting every detail as they slowly uncovered the buried Peterbilt. The truck's cab had been separated from its trailer, which was nowhere to be found in the immediate area. Evidence showed that the truck had been driven into a carefully prepared pit approximately 12 feet deep, then methodically covered with dirt, construction debris, and organic material. Over the years, natural vegetation had grown over the burial site, making it completely invisible from the surface. But what investigators found inside the cab would change everything they thought they knew about Tommy Morrison's disappearance. Tommy Morrison's body was not inside the truck, but the cab told a horrific story that made everyone's blood run cold. Extensive blood evidence on the driver's seat, dashboard, and steering wheel indicated that Tommy had been severely injured while trapped inside the vehicle. Ballistics experts found 3 distinct bullet holes in the passenger side door, suggesting that someone had fired into the cab from outside at close range. The most chilling discovery was hidden in the truck's glove compartment. Tommy's wallet, still containing his driver's license and credit cards, and a handwritten note that would crack the case wide open after 26 years of silence. The note, written in Tommy's careful handwriting that Sarah would immediately recognize, consisted of just 8 desperate words. "They're going to kill me. The warehouse has everything." FBI Special Agent Lisa Chen, who had been assigned to take over the reopened investigation, realized that the answer to Tommy's cryptic message might be literally right in front of them. The truck had been buried behind the abandoned warehouse on Maria Santos's property. Could this be the warehouse Tommy had referenced in his final, desperate message? The building had been officially abandoned since 1992, when the original owner, a shipping company called Desert Transport Solutions, had gone out of business during an economic downturn. Public records showed the property had changed hands several times over the years, eventually ending up as forgotten real estate. But when investigators began their systematic search of the warehouse interior, they discovered that the building hadn't been as abandoned as everyone had assumed for the past 3 decades. The warehouse was absolutely massive, 40,000 square feet of concrete floors and steel framework. From the outside, it looked completely derelict and uninhabitable. Broken windows, severely rusted siding, weeds growing through foundation cracks, and graffiti covering most exterior surfaces. But inside, investigators found evidence of recent activity that made their hearts race with anticipation and dread. Hidden in the northwest corner of the building, carefully concealed behind stacks of old shipping pallets and tarps, was a sophisticated workshop. This wasn't equipment for legitimate business operations. This was something far more sinister and illegal. The workshop contained professional-grade equipment for modifying commercial vehicles. Cutting torches, welding equipment, industrial paint booths, and specialized tools designed specifically for altering vehicle identification numbers and registration marks. Most significantly, investigators found containers of blue paint that laboratory analysis would later prove was an exact chemical match for the paint used on Tommy Morrison's Peterbilt. Agent Chen's team was methodically documenting the vehicle modification workshop when one of the crime scene technicians noticed something odd about the warehouse's concrete floor. In several distinct areas, the concrete appeared noticeably newer than the rest of the building's foundation. The color was slightly different, the surface was smoother, and the edges didn't quite match the weathering patterns of the surrounding floor. Ground-penetrating radar equipment confirmed their growing suspicions. Beneath the newer concrete sections were significant voids, empty spaces that strongly suggested the floor had been deliberately excavated and re-poured to cover something substantial. What they found beneath that concrete floor would reveal a criminal operation that had been systematically targeting truck drivers for decades. Buried beneath the warehouse floor were the remains of 4 additional vehicles. Not passenger cars, but commercial trucks, tractor trailers, delivery vehicles, and cargo trucks. All had been systematically stripped of their valuable cargo and carefully modified to remove any identifying features. Among the buried vehicles, investigators made their most significant discovery, the trailer portion of Tommy Morrison's rig. Still loaded with the electronics he'd been transporting to Phoenix in March 1997. The cargo, worth $127,000 26 years ago, remained in its original, sealed packaging. But the most shocking discovery came when investigators found personal effects belonging to other missing drivers. Wallets, commercial driver's licenses, logbooks, family photographs, and personal items from at least 6 different truckers who had disappeared over a 15-year period between 1985 and 2000. Tommy Morrison wasn't a random victim of highway crime. He had unknowingly stumbled into a sophisticated truck hijacking operation that had been systematically preying on commercial drivers for decades. The investigation into the defunct Desert Transport Solutions revealed the true scope of the criminal enterprise. The company had been an elaborate front for a truck hijacking ring operated by 3 criminal partners: Marcus Webb, a former security guard with access to shipping schedules; Vincent Vinny Carrera, a mechanic with documented connections to organized crime; and most shocking of all, someone much closer to Tommy Morrison than anyone had ever imagined. Robert Bobby Hayes had been Tommy Morrison's closest friend since childhood. They'd grown up just 3 houses apart in the same Denver neighborhood, attended the same elementary and high schools, played on the same baseball teams, and even worked together at Martinez Auto Repair before Tommy decided to pursue trucking. Bobby had been a pallbearer at Tommy's memorial service in 1999. He had spent countless hours comforting Sarah during her darkest moments of grief and uncertainty. He had helped organize volunteer search parties. He had spoken passionately at community meetings about highway safety and the dangers faced by commercial truck drivers. For over 2 decades, Bobby Hayes had been viewed as the loyal friend who refused to give up hope that Tommy would somehow return home safely. But Bobby Hayes had been living a double life that would make your blood run cold. The FBI's intensive investigation revealed that Bobby had been the crucial inside source for the hijacking ring for years. As a dispatcher for Rocky Mountain Freight, a direct competitor of Tommy's employer, Bobby had access to confidential shipping schedules, cargo manifests, and detailed route information for dozens of trucking companies throughout the Southwest. The criminal ring's method was both sophisticated and ruthlessly efficient. They would target trucks carrying high-value cargo electronics, pharmaceuticals, luxury goods, and other easily resold merchandise. Bobby would provide inside information about when and where these valuable shipments would be traveling, often days or weeks in advance. Most targeted drivers were simply knocked unconscious and abandoned while their trucks were stolen. The drivers would wake up hours later, confused and traumatized, but alive. However, some drivers, those who fought back or somehow threatened to expose the operation, faced a far more deadly fate. But investigators still faced a crucial question. How had Tommy Morrison discovered the operation? And why had his childhood friend chosen to target him specifically? The answer lay in a seemingly insignificant detail that investigators had completely missed for 26 years, hidden in plain sight within the original case files. On March 14, 1997, just one day before his disappearance, Tommy Morrison had made an unscheduled stop at Martinez Auto Repair to visit old friends and catch up on neighborhood news. It was a routine social call, the kind Tommy made whenever his delivery schedule brought him back to Denver. Original investigators had noted the visit, but considered it irrelevant to the case. Security footage from a nearby business showed Tommy having what appeared to be a casual conversation with Bobby Hayes in the garage's parking lot. At the time, detectives assumed it was simply 2 lifelong friends catching up on personal matters. But in 2023, audio enhancement technology that hadn't existed in 1997 allowed investigators to recover fragments of that conversation from security footage taken by a bank across the street. What they heard would finally explain everything that had happened to Tommy Morrison. Tommy had accidentally overheard Bobby Hayes during a phone call, discussing specific plans to intercept a truck carrying valuable electronics on Interstate 25 the following day. The conversation included enough details that Tommy immediately realized his friend was involved in criminal activity. Tommy had confronted Bobby directly, threatening to report him to police unless Bobby immediately severed all connections with the hijacking ring. Tommy gave Bobby an ultimatum: get out of the criminal operation within 24 hours, or face the consequences of Tommy's conscience. Bobby had panicked. He couldn't simply abandon the hijacking ring. Too much money was involved, and his criminal partners weren't the type of men who tolerated betrayal or loose ends. So Bobby Hayes made a decision that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Instead of protecting his oldest friend, he decided to sacrifice Tommy Morrison to protect his own criminal interests. Instead of calling off the planned hijacking operation, Bobby Hayes made a change that would cost Tommy Morrison his life. He provided the criminal ring with Tommy's route information, his truck's description and license plate, and his exact departure time from the Denver terminal. Tommy Morrison had been marked for death by his own childhood friend. The hijacking took place near Walsenburg, exactly where the satellite tracking data had indicated Tommy's truck had gone silent. Tommy had been forced off the highway and brought to the warehouse at gunpoint. According to physical evidence found at the scene, he had been brutally interrogated about what he knew and who else he might have told about the operation. Tommy's desperate final note, "They're going to kill me. The warehouse has everything," had been written during those final, terrifying hours. Somehow, even while facing death, he had managed to hide the note in his truck's glove compartment, knowing that someone someday would find it and uncover the truth. By 2023, two of the three conspirators were already dead. Marcus Webb had died in federal prison in 2011 while serving time for an unrelated racketeering conviction. Vincent Carrera had been killed in a gang-related shooting in Las Vegas in 2008. But Bobby Hayes was still alive, still living in Colorado, still working as a freight dispatcher, and still attending annual memorial services for his dear friend, Tommy Morrison. The FBI arrested Bobby Hayes on a Tuesday morning in March of 2023. He was at his desk at Rocky Mountain Freight, dispatching drivers on potentially dangerous routes while knowing full well the risks they might face from criminal operations, just like the one he had participated in for years. The evidence against Hayes was overwhelming, undeniable, and devastating. DNA evidence directly linked Bobby Hayes to the warehouse crime scene. Financial records revealed suspicious cash deposits and payments dating back to the 1990s. Phone records showed extensive contact with known criminals and suspected gang members. But the most damning evidence was discovered in a cardboard box hidden in Hayes' garage during the FBI search. Tommy Morrison's wedding ring, along with his watch and a photograph of Tommy and Sarah from their honeymoon. These weren't just pieces of evidence, they were trophies, sick mementos that Bobby Hayes had kept for 26 years as reminders of his ultimate betrayal. Sarah Morrison, now Sarah Williams after her remarriage, received the phone call she'd been desperately waiting for her entire adult life on March 28, 2023. Agent Chen personally drove to Oregon to deliver the news face-to-face. "It was the strangest feeling," Sarah later told reporters through tears. "For 26 years, I'd prayed for answers about what happened to Tommy. But when those answers finally came, I realized that part of me had preferred not knowing. The truth was so much worse than anything I'd ever imagined." The man who had comforted her after Tommy's disappearance, who had helped organize search parties, who had spoken at Tommy's memorial service about the sacred bonds of friendship and loyalty, that man had orchestrated her husband's murder. "Bobby came to my house every single year on the anniversary of Tommy's disappearance," Sarah remembered, her voice breaking with the weight of the betrayal. "He would sit in Tommy's favorite chair and tell me stories about their childhood adventures. He would look me directly in the eye and promise that someday we'd find out what happened to Tommy. All along, he knew exactly what had happened because he had planned and executed it himself." The complete FBI investigation revealed that the truck hijacking ring had been responsible for at least 12 commercial driver disappearances between 1985 and 2000. Tommy Morrison was the seventh victim of an operation that had generated millions of dollars in stolen cargo before eventually collapsing due to internal conflicts. Bobby Hayes was convicted on multiple serious charges including first-degree murder, racketeering, conspiracy, and organized criminal activity. In October 2023, he was sentenced to life in prison without any possibility of parole. At his sentencing hearing, Hayes finally confessed to his role in Tommy's murder, though he showed absolutely no remorse for betraying his childhood friend and destroying so many lives. "Tommy was going to ruin everything we'd built," Hayes said during his court confession. "We had a profitable operation running smoothly for years, and he wanted to destroy it all over some misguided sense of right and wrong. I did what I had to do to protect my financial interests and my freedom." Those would be the last public words Bobby Hayes ever spoke. The discovery of Tommy Morrison's truck and the subsequent investigation led to significant improvements in how law enforcement handles missing commercial drivers. The trucking industry implemented enhanced GPS tracking systems and improved emergency communication protocols. The FBI created a specialized task force focused specifically on crimes against commercial transportation workers. Tommy Morrison's case became a textbook example used in police academies across the country, demonstrating how cold cases can be solved through persistence, technological advancement, and careful attention to overlooked evidence. Maria Santos completed her gas station expansion project in late 2023, but she made an important change to her original plans. Instead of simply adding more parking spaces where Tommy's truck had been buried, she created something far more meaningful and lasting. Maria built a small memorial garden with a granite plaque honoring Tommy Morrison and the other drivers who had lost their lives to the hijacking ring. The memorial is surrounded by blue flowers, Tommy's favorite color according to Sarah. The inscription reads, "In memory of Thomas Morrison and all commercial drivers who never made it home to their families. Your sacrifice brought justice and made America's highways safer for those who followed in your path." Today, Sarah Williams works as a victim's advocate in Oregon, dedicating her life to helping other families navigate the same dark waters of uncertainty and grief that she once traveled alone. She never remarried after her second husband's death in 2019, finding peace and purpose in helping others find their own answers. Tommy was a genuinely good man who made the fatal mistake of trusting the wrong person, Sarah reflects. But his story didn't end when he was murdered. It continued through everyone who refused to forget him, everyone who kept searching for the truth when it seemed impossible to find. Evil people think they can make good people disappear forever, but they're wrong. The truth has a way of rising to the surface, even after 26 years buried in the ground. The Memorial Garden has become an unexpected pilgrimage site for truck drivers traveling through Colorado. Many stop to pay their respects to Tommy Morrison and to remember that their own safety depends on trust, vigilance, and looking out for one another. The blue Peterbilt that carried Tommy Morrison on his final journey has been carefully restored by volunteer mechanics and is now permanently displayed at the Colorado State Police Academy. It serves as a powerful training aid for new investigators studying missing person cases and cold case methodology. Every year, hundreds of new police recruits learn about Tommy Morrison, a truck driver who died because he refused to stay silent about injustice, and whose case was ultimately solved by people who refused to let his story end in darkness and silence. The FBI estimates that dozens of commercial driver disappearances from the pre-GPS era remain unsolved across the United States. Tommy Morrison's case proved that sophisticated criminal organizations had been systematically targeting the trucking industry for decades, using inside information in remote locations to make hardworking drivers vanish without a trace. Modern technology has made such large-scale operations more difficult today, but certainly not impossible. The lesson of Tommy Morrison's story isn't just about justice delayed, it's about the critical importance of trust, the devastating consequences of betrayal, and the remarkable power of persistence when facing seemingly impossible odds. Tommy's case also highlighted the vulnerability of commercial drivers who spend their lives alone on America's highways, often carrying valuable cargo through isolated areas with minimal communication backup. The trucking industry has since implemented numerous safety improvements, but the fundamental risks remain. The warehouse where Tommy Morrison died has been completely demolished. In its place, Maria Santos built a truck stop with 24-hour security, well-lit parking areas, and multiple communication systems, creating the kind of safe haven that might have saved Tommy's life if it had existed in 1997. What makes Tommy Morrison's story so profoundly compelling isn't just the shocking betrayal or the incredible investigative breakthrough after 26 years. It's what his story reveals about the fundamental nature of human character, the power of persistence, and the inevitable triumph of truth over deception. Think about this for a moment. Bobby Hayes lived with his secret for over 2 decades. Every single day for 26 years, he woke up knowing he had murdered his best friend. He attended memorial services, comforted the widow, helped organize search parties, and looked Sarah Morrison in the eye while promising that someday they'd find out what happened to Tommy. The psychological weight of that deception should have been crushing, yet Hayes continued his charade with chilling precision. This raises disturbing questions about the people around us. How well do we really know the individuals we trust most? Hayes wasn't a stranger who committed a random act of violence. He was Tommy's childhood friend, someone who had shared countless memories, celebrations, and life milestones. If Bobby Hayes could maintain such an elaborate deception for decades, what does that say about our ability to truly know another person's heart? But here's what I find even more remarkable. Despite Hayes's sophisticated deception, the truth eventually surfaced. Not through luck or accident, but through the relentless march of technological advancement and the dedication of people who refused to let Tommy Morrison become just another forgotten statistic. Maria Santos could have simply demolished that warehouse and built her parking lot without thinking twice about the slightly uneven ground. Jake Martinez could have assumed he'd hit old construction debris and continued working. The FBI could have treated this as just another old truck discovery and filed it away. But each person in this chain chose to dig deeper, to ask more questions, to pursue the truth even when it would have been easier to look the away. That's the real lesson of Tommy Morrison's story. Evil succeeds when good people choose convenience over conscience, when they decide that asking difficult questions isn't worth the effort. Bobby Hayes counted on people's natural tendency to avoid uncomfortable truths, to accept simple explanations, to move on with their lives rather than pursuing justice for someone they'd never met. The technology that finally solved Tommy's case, ground-penetrating radar, DNA analysis, audio enhancement, digital forensics, didn't exist in 1997. Hayes committed what he believed was the perfect crime using the limitations of that era's investigative capabilities. But he made a crucial miscalculation. He assumed that time would bury the evidence permanently, that advancing technology would never reach back to expose his decades-old crimes. This should serve as a warning to anyone who thinks they can commit evil acts and escape consequences simply by waiting long enough. In our interconnected, technologically advancing world, there's no such thing as a truly cold case anymore. Evidence doesn't disappear, it waits. DNA doesn't degrade completely. Digital footprints don't vanish entirely. And somewhere, someone is always working to improve the tools we use to uncover buried truths. Tommy Morrison's story also demonstrates the incredible power of moral courage in the face of overwhelming personal risk. Tommy could have simply minded his own business when he overheard Bobby's phone conversation. He could have convinced himself that it wasn't his responsibility to get involved, that reporting his suspicions might ruin an innocent man's life based on circumstantial evidence. Instead, Tommy Morrison chose to confront evil directly, even though that choice cost him everything. He died because he refused to be complicit in criminal activity, because his conscience wouldn't allow him to stay silent while others were victimized. That kind of moral courage is rare and precious in any era, but it becomes even more significant when we consider what it cost him. Sarah Morrison's journey from devastated widow to victim's advocate represents another kind of courage, the determination to transform personal tragedy into a force for good. She could have allowed bitterness and despair to consume her life after Tommy's disappearance. Instead, she channeled her pain into helping other families navigate similar dark waters. Her work has brought comfort and practical assistance to countless people facing their own missing person nightmares. The memorial garden that Maria Santos created where Tommy's truck was buried has become more than just a tribute. It's become a symbol of how ordinary people can choose to honor tragedy rather than simply moving past it. Every truck driver who stops to pay respects, every family member who finds comfort in knowing Tommy Morrison isn't forgotten, every police recruit who learns from his case represents a victory of remembrance over oblivion. But perhaps the most profound lesson of Tommy Morrison's story is about the nature of justice itself. We often think of justice as immediate and decisive, crime committed, criminal caught, punishment delivered. Tommy's case reminds us that real justice is often a marathon, not a sprint. It requires patience, persistence, and the faith that truth will eventually prevail even when all evidence suggests otherwise. The fact that Tommy Morrison received justice after 26 years should give hope to every family still waiting for answers about their missing loved ones. Technology continues advancing. New investigative techniques continue developing. Cold case units continue working. And sometimes construction workers expanding a gas station accidentally uncover the evidence that changes everything. In our current era of instant communication and constant connectivity, it's easy to assume that people can't simply vanish without a trace anymore. Tommy Morrison's case reminds us that sophisticated criminals will always adapt to technological limitations, finding new ways to exploit the gaps in our security systems. The price of safety is eternal vigilance, not just from law enforcement, but from ordinary citizens who refuse to look the other way when something doesn't seem right. As we close Tommy Morrison's story, we're left with a choice that each of us must make in our own lives. Will we be Bobby Hayes or Tommy Morrison? Will we choose personal gain over moral principle? Will we stay silent when we witness injustice? Or will we find the courage to speak up regardless of the personal cost? The road goes on, and so does the eternal search for justice. Tommy Morrison's legacy isn't just a solved cold case or a restored truck in a police academy. His legacy is the reminder that good people, armed with determination and unwavering commitment to truth, can ultimately triumph over even the most sophisticated evil. And sometimes, just sometimes, that triumph comes when you least expect it. Buried beneath the ground of an abandoned warehouse, waiting 26 years for someone brave enough to dig deeper and ask the hard questions that change everything. If this incredible story of betrayal, persistence, and ultimate justice left you questioning everything you thought you knew about trust and friendship, make sure to subscribe to our channel for more shocking true crime investigations. Hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into cases that prove truth really is stranger than fiction. Remember, in a world that sometimes seems full of Bobby Hayes, choose to be Tommy Morrison. Stand up for what's right, even when it's dangerous. Question what doesn't seem right, even when it's easier to look away. The truth is always worth fighting for, and justice, no matter how long delayed, is always worth pursuing. Because somewhere out there, another family is waiting for answers. Another construction worker might hit something unexpected. Another cold case might be one phone call away from being solved. And the example of people like Tommy Morrison, Sarah Williams, Maria Santos, and everyone who refused to let this story end in darkness continues to inspire the next generation of truth seekers. Thank you so much for joining me on this incredible journey into one of the most disturbing cases I've ever covered. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more crime content and let me know in the comments what case you'd like me to investigate next. Until then, stay safe out there.